Minute, then it should be sent to YouTube. And we are live, I think. Um, all right. Hello. Happy Monday. Good morning. And welcome to Neuroccino, our online journal club. We give it Monday at 9:30, where the rules are very simple. Someone has to present a paper. The only rule is it can't be your own work because we're not promoting our own work here. More people are joining. Hello, Eva. Hello, Philip. And Chris is going to present today. So without any further ado, take it away if you're ready.
All right, so
There is the
I'm gonna take this one.
amazing Michelle is joining. Full
Right.
house today. I am going to share the link on YouTube as well in the YouTube chat so that people who are following us on YouTube can take a look directly at the paper. Yeah, go for it.
All right, so today I'm gonna talk about large language models again. Seems to be a theme for the papers that I'm presenting. So it was a paper published in Nature Human Behavior, and it's about how large language models seem to surpass human experts in predicting neuroscience results. First, they talk about the challenges of research, and especially, I mean, they are especially true in neuroscience. But one thing that is very difficult for humans now is to make sense of the massive literature that there is, and it's literally impossible in a lifetime to read everything there is on a scientific topic. And also, there are difficulties with the studies that we read, that we select, because an individual study can be noisy, it can be unreliable, it may not be easy to replicate it, or even possible. So of course we have some mechanisms to try to assess the quality of the papers, but sometimes I mean, it's always difficult. And also, neuroscience especially is a very complex field of science because, as they say, it's a multi-level science because we study from molecular mechanisms to behavior. And in the middle, there are a lot of different layers and resolutions of what we study. And also, probably because of that, the analysis methods are extremely diverse and complex. So that's why it's very difficult for humans to assess whether the result, what to predict a result from a study design, essentially. So what they wanted to do is compare whether large language models are better at that than humans. And so they developed a BrainBench, so a benchmark method and tool that is a little bit different from the usual benchmarks that we use for large language models. Because most of the benchmarks that are used right now are backward looking. So we asking a question to the LLM, and we see if the LLM replies with the correct answer. But it's more difficult for the prediction, and it's less common if done at all in benchmarks for the prediction. So a small example is who is more likely to win the next round here in ping pong. I don't think an LLM could judge that, but anyway, and evaluating whether the prediction is correct or not is what is interesting the authors in this paper. So to do that, they took a bunch of papers. I think it's a 200 papers. They took the abstract and they modified the abstract to change the results. So they have two abstracts, the original one and the modified, and they ask LLMs. They tested different LLMs and a bunch of experts in neuroscience to tell which of the abstracts is the correct one. So which and in the abstracts they specifically changed the results. They didn't touch the methods and the background. They just changed the results in different ways. I will explain a little bit more. And the LLM and the experts had to do the same thing, pick which one was the real one. Um, and they also asked the experts to evaluate how confident they are in their choice. And they also derived what they call the perplexity measure on the LLMs to have this kind of confidence measure grade for the answer of the LLMs. And as I understand it, the perplexity is the probability of the next of the prediction. So they had to have access to the weights of the models, and they extracted the probability of the next tokens in the text, and that was because the basically the LLM would predict the whether the abstract is the correct one or the wrong one, and depending on how likely it is for abstract one to be predicted and how likely it is for abstract two to be predicted, they would do the difference between these two confidence and have the confidence of the choice essentially, if I understood correctly. And that would give something comparable to the confidence of the choice for the humans. So what they found, the performance. Um, yeah, so the performance is around, for the humans, the performance is around 63%, knowing that the baseline is 50% because it's a two choice task, two choices task. So 63% is better than chance, but not exceptional. And the LLMs had an average accuracy of 81%, so almost a 20% increase at predicting the results, the correct results of a neuroscience study, which is a pretty big difference. And also, they showed that the confidence was pretty consistent with the accuracy of the results. So, if the experts were saying, "I am pretty confident that I chose the right abstract between the two," it was more likely that they had the correct answer than if they have a lower confidence, which is reassuring for the humans, but also reassuring for the large language models. Um, that's the perplexity. Also, they tested, they tried to see why what was reducing or increasing the performance of the large language models. So first, they tried to only give parts of the abstract to see whether the LLM really needed the whole abstract to predict the result correctly, or if it was mostly using its own knowledge base to predict the results, the correct results. And when they were breaking up the abstracts, the LLMs were significantly reducing their performance, their predictive performance. And also, they trained another LLM. So they used it's Mistral. They used, I think it's the 7 billion parameters Mistral model that they fine-tuned on do they, they fine-tuned it on a lot of papers, neuroscience papers. I don't know if the number is here. But anyway, yeah, they used loads, I think, hundreds, 100,000 or something like that papers that they could access to fine tune a Mistral 7 billion model to be specialized in neuroscience, essentially. And they showed a 3% increase in the benchmark, their benchmark of prediction. So you're showing that the general purpose large language models are already pretty good at predicting neuroscience results, but if you fine tune them, they are even better and still way better. So now it's well above the 20% increase of performance compared to humans. Um, and also, of course, there are some questions about the results. Are we that bad uh, at predicting results? Is the model so magically performant? And for their explanations of how reliable their performance is, I would say that I'm not entirely convinced. So, first thing, a question that I had directly is whether the models already had the articles that they judged in their knowledge base. So they used a method, it's the zlib perplexity. So I don't know exactly how it works, but the zlib is giving a ratio for the whether an information is already in the model or not. But it's like an indirect value, so I'm not entirely sure how reliable it is to tell whether this information was already seen by the model or not. There was a question of like, is the model, is the text showed to the model a surprise to the model? But because they used many different models, I'm not sure how reliable, how is it working for every model or not. I'm not super certain that it works. And also, even though the model might have seen the paper before, compared to the amount of data that it's seen, I'm not entirely sure you can actually distinguish if it's seen the paper or not, because it's just one data point at some point that modified just a little bit the weights. I'm not entirely sure we can be confident that the models have not seen any of the papers. Um, and also it's a choice task, so they are also saying that their models would need to be modified to be actually useful for researchers because right now the model is just choosing between two abstracts. It's not actually creating the prediction of the results. So it's not as if they've given a paper to the model and told the model predict the results and it was right. No, that's not what happened. So that's a much simpler question that they asked to the large language models. And on top of that, I would say that from the abstract, maybe for humans, there is not enough information to um, predict the results. And I don't even know if the LLM would be able to fully predict the results from just the abstract. So it's also a very restricted experiment that they did. Um, I mean, when most of the time when you read the abstracts, you can't really tell what's in the paper. An indication of the results and what type of methods that they used, but it doesn't give you a lot of information, and I don't think that's enough to make a good prediction anyway. Um, so that's about the confidence. Yeah, so as I said, I'm not entirely confident that the models did not memorize some of the papers before. But that was interesting to fine tune the neuroscience model, even though I would have expected the model to be better than just 3% better. But anyway, and one thing that I noted as well is how they created the examples. Um, so they used 200 test cases and so, as I said, they took the abstract and modified the results in the abstract to be different from what it actually is. And they did that for 100 manually by human experts, and another 100 were modified by GPT-4. And there might be a bias there because there might also be a way for the LLM to realize that the words have been written, or the text has been written by an LLM, because large language models are able to copy the style of other people. So it has in its weights, it has the ability to differentiate between writing styles. And I think the LLM could also, when looking at text, it could also be like, oh, this text is more likely to be written by a human, um, even without even looking at how logical the text is. So that might have inflated the accuracy of the LLMs and they don't really discuss that. And it's difficult. It's also difficult to evaluate how well they modified the language model, the abstracts for the test cases. But I think that could be a pretty strong bias because if the LLM is not even looking at what's in the text, but it's looking at the style of the text and be like, oh, that's been modified by a human, or that's been modified by a that looks like GPT generated text. It doesn't even have to look at the content, and it would have a much easier time to answer than a human. Um, and yeah, they give some more details on the accuracy, and I think that was pretty much. Oh yeah, there was something I noted as well in the participants. Unsurprisingly, there was a big difference between male and female, but the difference is pretty significant. What they say is that men are substantially worse at predicting the results than large language models. I don't know if for the women it's as clear as that. Um, I don't know if they could have done a split in the data set to see if there was a difference between men and women in confidence, because we know that there are a lot of differences in the confidence of answers and stuff like that between men and women. So that could have been something to look at. But the study is pretty big. They've really done a lot of analysis to be as confident as possible in their results, but they couldn't do everything. But in the end, I think it's a an interesting thing to do, because so what they say also is that it could help us researchers to evaluate our hypothesis, make new ones. But of course, we have to be careful not to be over reliable on these tools, because there are biases, and also these tools are trained on our data. And we know that in research, a lot, like many papers, are not fully correct, if correct at all, because of many things. And we are trying as much as possible to validate our papers, replicate and all, but the science is so enormous that there are some bad quality papers that are going through the filters all the time. So, and the large language models are trained on these papers as well. So they would also be biased, and we could also overfit to some results if we were over relying on these tools, because we could just tunnel vision on one thing that the LLM said, oh, that's what you should be observing. So try to observe it as much as possible, and you're gonna have the best result. And that's a very wrong way to do science. So we have to be careful with that. But I think that could still be a very interesting thing to do with these models. So yeah, that's it for the paper. I see that there are a bunch of questions.
Awesome. Thank you so very much, Chris. That was a really interesting insight into large language models and how they can be used in neuroscience, or what the current yeah, state of the art, or the current situation is. Yeah, there are many hands up. I think Eduardo was the first one. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Really nice paper. So, yeah, to pick up what you said about the bias, one question is, did they use just one, if I got it right, did they use just one paper to test humans and
No, they used the 200 papers,
oh,
that
okay.
200 abstracts. Yeah. And
Okay.
hopefully the abstracts are not in the training set.
Okay, because I was wondering, I think it's figure 3 or just the one you have on the screen a little bit lower. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the panel C is showing that there is no substantial difference between like different stages of let's say science people.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
also
that's
something.
actually interesting to see that the worst performance was doctoral students. And even pre-doctoral students had a better performance.
Okay,
But it's also
that's
the largest set. So
okay, yeah, yeah, the proportion is not balanced, but it's also a little bit surprising to me because reading papers is a skill you can acquire and you have to acquire if you go through an academic career and
yeah.
definitely go better as the time pass, you get faster, you get more efficient. So yeah, it's a little bit weird to me. And my second question is on the image just above is so they try to figure out some measures of confidence and expertise in for the humans and for the LLM. My question is, so this is look like an assumption to me, like assuming that these two things are equals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if you have any thought on this, like how much it is actually the case according to you, according to your expertise or opinion, because it seems to me like a big leap to assume that these two things are the same.
Yeah, I don't. Of course, it's difficult because how humans evaluate the confidence is extremely complex, and
Yeah.
there are loads of things that are coming into play to evaluate your confidence because you could have just your in first your just base level in your own abilities will drastically change your confidence in your answers because I mean I would expect that especially pre-doctoral or just PhD students will have a lower baseline of confidence in their answers, and these biases are not present in the large language models because the large language models don't have um, um, well, first, it's always one large language model that we are evaluating, so its confidence won't change over time or over whatever. So they compared four, maybe more because four models, maybe more because they changed the number of parameters, but let's say 20 models. They compared them to hundreds of participants, and each participant has a different set of biases. So is already that is difficult to compare between the two, and then the measure of perplexity, it's also a different mechanism from how we evaluate confidence in our brains. So it's difficult to compare, but I would say that it's still pretty decent because they see the same trends of confidence and performance. So that means it seems to be a decent proxy for the actual confidence of the model. So on that, I'm not too worried uh, for this measure as a comparison to actual confidence for humans. And for the first part of the of your question about the people, the real people. That's true that the difference in performance is weird, and you would expect a much better performance. Although you could argue that older researchers might have more biases because we tend to specialize in and become more confident in a specific domain, but for the other domains we might that confidence might leak to the other domains, and we still feel confident in our answers even though we didn't work on these questions for years and years, whereas
Yeah.
maybe students are a little bit more generalists because they had to. That's the potential explanation for the pretty much consistent performance between all the levels in science. But yeah, it's true that I
I
would
mean,
expect at the beginning of the career, that's hard to have a really good prediction on a lot of different papers.
yeah. Also, I would have assumed they controlled this like aspect of the experiment, but yeah.
Yeah, I didn't see
Interesting.
any very strong controls on that.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, thank you so much.
The time we're gonna move
Yeah.
forward and let Harry ask a question and then
Yeah.
Eva.
Thank you, Chris, for this presentation. A lot of questions, but I will focus only on one. So we talked about the bias in the participants. Now about the abstracts they selected. So I was surprised I selected only abstract from one journal, Journal of Neuroscience.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and my question is more on, so in when you write a paper, you can write a paper on something we already know. It's just we try to put more variable in. So, for example, you want to test if this hypothesis is true when we do that. So it's kind of confirming the results, and other papers are more about new results, completely new. And I was wondering if they tried to select, so they selected abstract based on the topic, but did they try to see if some abstracts are more difficult to guess because they are completely new, and so the model cannot guess as fast or as accurately as for other abstracts.
I didn't see anything in the paper about that. I didn't go into the supplementary material. I think they're saying that there is more information about the study design. I don't know if they selected the difficulty of the paper, the abstracts, if they selected different type of results, as you said, if it's a result that confirms that replicates
Yeah.
previous results or not, or if it's new findings. I and they don't mention it into the text, so I would expect that that would be an important information. If they had been worried about that, I guess they should have mentioned it into the text, and they don't. So that's true. That could also be a bias. Because if you have two studies that are pretty that are studying the same question, especially if they replicate the results as well, because the LLMs can see the distance, can model the distance between texts. They could have the previous study in their training set and the new study that would be very similar to the first study. So they would already know this type of results, and that's something that humans couldn't do except by extreme chance, because we don't read billions or millions of papers. But the LLMs, they do. So yeah, that's true that it could be a pretty strong bias, and that could explain the to me the surprisingly large difference between humans and LLMs.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right, we have the time for a very last question by Eva. Go ahead.
Well, my main question was just answered. It was also about the abstracts, but now I was also thinking, maybe I missed it, but the human experts, they're not an expert on their specific field, no? They're just neuroscience experts.
Yes, yeah, it's
And then is it fair
yeah.
to compare a model that is an expert in every field with then humans that are experts on one field?
In that case, I would say maybe it should be unfair to the generalist large language models, because the most of well, they only fine tune the one model, but all the other models are just generalist LLMs. So compared to experts in neuroscience, um, you could say that the it's a little bit unfair, even though they are performing better. And that's true that the maybe the problem is that the ability of the LLMs to read loads of papers is unfair when you're talking about the whole field of neuroscience, because within the field of neuroscience there are so many specialties, and that's true that I mean, when someone is studying behavior, if you ask them to evaluate a paper on machine learning models to simulate some mechanisms in the brain, there is no way they can accurately evaluate the results. So there might also be a problem with that, because the experts in neuroscience are never expert. It's basically impossible to be expert in the whole field of neuroscience, because It's so vast. So that's, yeah, that would have been better to have specific expert fields. Maybe that would be interesting to replicate the study with the collaboration of journals, because you could have the people that you ask for reviews on different topics, and you could ask them, so you've been deemed expert in this specific topic. So then we're going to select some abstracts in this specific topic and see if you can predict the results accurately, and compare that to the large language models. I think that would have been a little bit more fair, because we don't really want to ask any researcher in neuroscience to evaluate any paper in neuroscience ever. Then, and that could explain part of the results.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. If there are no more questions, then I'd like to thank Chris for presenting the paper again, and thank you everyone for joining and discussing. And have a great Monday and a happy weekend. Oh, not weekend, week in science. Exciting week in science. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you. Bye bye. See you next week.